If we're being honest, Mitsubishi has had kind of a rocky decade, but we're not here to talk about that today. Instead, we're here to talk about the new Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid, the first compact crossover in America that has a plug that's not a luxury vehicle. Gasoline versions of the Outlander have been on sale worldwide since 2013, and interestingly enough, the plug-in hybrid model has actually been on sale in Europe for quite some time now. The reason that we're finally seeing it in America is because Mitsubishi has started to ramp up production and they're able to produce enough to sell in the United States. That may sound a little strange for a brand that has very low sales overall, but the Outlander plug-in hybrid is actually the best-selling plug-in hybrid in the European Union. In the United States, the Outlander and the Outlander plug-in hybrid are classified as compact crossovers, so these compete with the likes of the RAV4 hybrid, the Rogue hybrid, and of course things like the Honda CR-V, the Hyundai Tucson, etc. But because this is a hybrid vehicle, we're going to focus this video primarily on the Rogue hybrid and the RAV4 hybrid. Be sure and let me know what you think about the front end and the overall styling down there in the comments section below. The front end is a little bit busy. There are a lot of shapes going on here, but I think the overall look is a little bit more attractive than the Toyota RAV4's front end. You'll notice we have a little bit less of a grille going on right here than many of the entries in the compact crossover segment. These large chrome bars on each side and big headlamps. The headlamps themselves are LED low beams. In this particular model, we also have LED fog lamps, but all models use halogen high beams. If you thought the Outlander looked a little bit narrow from the front view, then you're right. This is about 2 to 3 inches narrower overall than a RAV4 or CR-V. But it's actually fairly long for the compact crossover segment at 184.8 inches long. That makes this about the same length as the Nissan Rogue, a little bit longer than a RAV4. And that makes sense because certain versions of the Outlander do have a third row in the back like we used to see in the Rogue. Out back, we find LED brake lamps and LED accent strips, but incandescent turn signals, although they are amber, which is my preference. Like many crossovers, there are a few different engine options under this hood. Things start out with a 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine producing 166 horsepower. That's mated to a continuously variable transmission. Then we have a 3.0-liter V6, which we've seen under the hood of Mitsubishi's for some time. That produces 224 horsepower in its latest version. That's mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission. And then we have this very unique plug-in hybrid system here. Mitsubishi's plug-in all-wheel drive hybrid system is quite unique and a little confusing. So let's take a deep dive into how it works, because that's critical to understanding why the Outlander drives the way that it does. Things start out with a 2-liter gasoline engine. This engine makes a maximum of 117 horsepower and 137 pound-feet of torque. Details are a little scarce, but the rumor mill tells us that this will be upgraded to a 2.4-liter Atkinson cycle engine for 2019. The engine is directly connected to a 70 kilowatt generator that's equivalent to around 94 horsepower. Electricity from the generator flows into the 12 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack under the car. To move the car forward, Mitsubishi uses 2 independent electric motors. Both motors are rated at 80 horsepower, but the torque rating is actually a little bit different. The Outlander can power one or both motors from the battery alone, up to about 60 kilowatts total or 80 horsepower maximum. If more than 80 horsepower is called upon, the engine will start, the generator then generates power and sends it along to the front and rear traction motors. At this point, you're no doubt thinking, didn't Mitsubishi say the system was good for 197 horsepower total? How do you get 197 from 2 80 horsepower motors? This is where things get a little bit more complicated to explain. Inside the housing, where we find the generator and the front electric motor, is also a clutch. This clutch can engage and send power mechanically via a fixed ratio to the front wheels. This is what Mitsubishi refers to as their parallel hybrid mode. Now let's put everything together. The battery is the limiting factor in EV mode. You can operate essentially at any speed, but you're only going to get 80 horsepower out of the system. When operating as a hybrid, the vehicle starts out as a serial hybrid because that's the only way to get you up to 42 miles an hour. This mode applies in basically every load situation, whether it's part throttle or full throttle, as long as it's operating in hybrid mode. It's a true serial hybrid. The engine is turning, it's running a generator, the generator is sending power to those electric motors. Maximum power is 160 horsepower as long as there's charge available in the battery. If the battery drops down to some other state of charge, then the maximum power you could get is about 94 horsepower. Once you get up to highway speeds and the power demands are fairly low, the vehicle will switch into parallel hybrid mode. It will engage that clutch pack and send power directly to the front wheels. If you need power at the rear wheels, or if you want to charge the battery or maintain its state of charge, then the vehicle will operate the generator and send power to wherever it's needed. At highway speeds, if you need more power or more torque, the system will move back to a serial hybrid mode. This gives you that 160 horsepower total, again drawing from the battery and drawing from that generator. And this mode will take you up to right around 70 miles an hour or so. Depending on a variety of factors, between 65 and 70 miles an hour, if you command a great deal of acceleration out of the vehicle, it will move back to a parallel hybrid mode. This is where you get that maximum 197 horsepower. However, it ramps up slowly. At around 65 miles an hour or so, the system can deliver about 160 horsepower total, and then as you move on up to about 90 miles an hour, that's when you hit the peak of 197 horsepower. That means that many people in America may never actually see 197 horsepower out of their Outlander hybrid, because in truth, there are very few areas in the United States where it's legal to actually get the full horsepower out of this hybrid system. Because of the fixed ratio between the engine and the front wheels, as you accelerate, there would be a point in time where the vehicle would have to move back to a serial hybrid mode in order to prevent over-revving the engine. However, the Outlander doesn't really go that fast, so it's not really a concern for this particular system. When it comes to fuel economy, the EPA treats plug-in hybrids a little bit differently than regular hybrids. We don't get a separate city and highway number in this vehicle. We just get a 25 mile per gallon combined score. Now, because this can operate in an electric-only mode, they give us a separate score of 74 mpge when this is operating solely on electricity. The 12 kilowatt-hour battery pack is active air-cooled to help improve life, and it's charged via this charging port right back here. We have an onboard 3.7 kilowatt charger that can charge this battery in 3.5 hours if you give it 240 volts, or about 8 hours if you plug this into standard 110 volts. At this point, you might be wondering why this charge door is so large. That's because next to the J1772 charging connector, that's where we do the level 1 and level 2 charging, we have a DC fast charge port. This is a CHAdeMO standard port, which is the standard that's also used by the Soul EV and of course the Nissan Leaf. If you have access to a DC fast charge station, you can charge this battery to 80% in 25 minutes or less. The DC fast charge port is kind of an interesting touch for a plug-in hybrid vehicle because not many in the world have a DC fast charge ability. The logical reason for that, of course, is because gasoline goes in on the other side of the Outlander Sport, and that's sort of the fast charge ability that most plug-in hybrid vehicles have. Likely because of the Outlander's age, the seating position strikes me as a little bit unusual. It's definitely more upright than the average modern crossover, which has taken on more of a car-like demeanor, even though they have a ride height that's definitely above the average sedan. Now, if you like feeling a little bit more upright, this may be a better option for you, but if you really want your seat to go further to the ground, that's not going to be an option in this car. We also don't have a two-way adjustable lumbar support, which is something that we see in most of the cars in this segment, or a two-position seat memory over there. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, and the front seats are overall fairly comfortable, again, other than that lack of adjustable lumbar. Moving back to the rear seats, these are a little bit less comfortable than the RAV4, CR-V, or Rogue seats because this is overall a slightly smaller vehicle inside. We definitely have a little bit less legroom, although it is still quite generous at about 4 or 5 inches sitting right here behind myself, but we definitely have less headroom than some of those competitors. Keep in mind that we are driving the model with the sunroof, and that definitely does cut down on headroom in the back. Now, these rear seats do have a decent amount of recline to them. We can move all the way back into a position that is fairly comfortable, and the recline mechanism is nice and low on the seat back. I do appreciate that. If I scoot all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I still have about 1 inch of legroom left, and the floor back here is almost flat because we don't have that drive shaft going to the back. Instead, we have a battery pack under there. Generally speaking, vehicles that were designed to accommodate a third row have a squarer profile in the back, and that leads to improved cargo practicality. That's definitely true for this. Although the plug-in hybrid does not get the third row that we see in the regular gasoline-only model, that design improves the practicality for all models. 38 to 39 cubic feet is where this segment tends to top out for non-hybrid models. And if you start taking a look at just the hybrid models, this actually beats the Rogue Hybrid, which comes in at 27 cubic feet and is almost the same as the RAV4 Hybrid, which is 35.6 cubic feet. And keep in mind, the RAV4 has a much, much smaller battery. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim. We have a moonroof right there above the front row seats. We have height adjustable seat belts for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. This vehicle has leather upholstery. We have a little bit of contrasting piping going on right there in the middle of that seat back and on the side bolsters. As with most compact crossovers, the front doors are a combination of hard and soft touch plastics. We have a soft touch injection molded upper section and then some stitched materials right over here on the door panel around the armrest. Moving over to the dashboard, we find more injection molded soft touch plastics on the upper section of the dashboard, hard plastics lower on the dashboard, for instance, this area right here below those passenger air vents. There's also a moderately sized bin-style glove compartment. I was able to fit a large tablet computer inside. The overall style of the interior is not quite as fresh as some of the other compact crossovers in America, but Mitsubishi has done a few things to try and keep this interior up to date. All plug-in hybrid models get a standard touchscreen infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support that really helps improve the user experience in the system, and it means that all models effectively get factory navigation if you have a compatible smartphone. We also have Sirius XM, of course AM/FM, Bluetooth integration, a dedicated standard iPod interface. No hybrid vehicle would be complete without displays showing you what the hybrid system is doing. We have our energy monitor here showing you EV power, instant fuel economy, charge, and cumulative charge. We also have an energy flow diagram that would show power coming from the engine to the wheels directly or to the wheels via the battery pack. It also shows the rear wheels there. There's also an eco information screen which tells you what portion of your driving has been in EV mode. Continuing down from there, we find a hazard light button, an eco mode button, dual zone automatic climate control. Below the climate control, we find a 12-volt power port, the button to enable and disable the power tailgate, and the slot right over here on the right side of your screen. That's where you would put the remote control if its battery was dead and you still needed to start the car with the keyless ignition. We then have a row of function buttons below that, a button to turn on and off that AC inverter outlet in the rear, the blind spot warning system, and the heated steering wheel. You'll find the two cup holders beneath that little door, and even though the climate controls do stick out a little bit up here, there's definitely enough room for large takeout cups. The shifter is one of the things in this vehicle that took me a long time to get used to. This operates very much like the Prius shifter, as you can see from this little diagram right here. It is a joystick style, so it always returns to center. For neutral, we pull to the left. For reverse, we pull to the left, push forward. For drive, we pull to the left and pull backwards. For the enhanced braking mode, we simply pull right down to B. On either side of this, we have a charge mode button and a save mode button. Those are fairly self-explanatory. This causes the hybrid system to charge the battery. This causes the hybrid system to save the charge in the battery for later. Behind those buttons, we find some additional buttons that really make this system unique. The first one is this twin motor four-wheel drive lock button. As you'd imagine, this makes the car send power equally to the front and rear electric motors. Now, obviously, it's not a true lock function because they're never going to be spinning at exactly the same rate, but this is trying to make those axles spin as close to the same rate as is possible with modern electronics. Behind that, we have an EV mode button that will try and keep the car in EV mode a little bit longer than normal. However, if you floor it, it will still turn on the gasoline engine. We then have an automatic brake hold button, which operates if you're in drive, and then an electric parking brake. Behind there, we have the heated seat controls and then a softly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal a storage compartment with two tiers. The upper tier right here you can see is more than able to hold a smartphone and a wallet. And then going inside from there, we have two USB ports right at the back and an additional 12-volt outlet. The instrument cluster should be pretty familiar to most hybrid owners. We have a charge and power gauge over here on the left instead of a tachometer. Charge happens down here in this blue zone. And roughly speaking, the electric motor will operate in this green section right here, and in the white section, the gasoline engine seems to turn on. On the right side, we have a pretty typical speedometer, and in the center, we have a color multifunction display. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design with some small sport grips up top, and then an injection molded cover that has some simulated stitching on it. The left side of the wheel is where we find infotainment controls, track forward, backward, a volume toggle here, and a source button. And then this button's kind of interesting because this enables and disables the optional 360-degree camera system. You'll find that display in the color touchscreen infotainment system. It gives us a forward view, a 360-degree top view, as you can see right over there. If I press it again, we get a side view, which helps you clear obstacles over there on the right side of the car. If I were to put it into reverse, we'd also get a backup view. On the right side of the wheel, we find the buttons that control the cruise control or the optional adaptive cruise control system. We have a cancel button, a toggle for speed up and down, a button to turn on and off the system, and then a button to change the following distance. The rest of these buttons are just button blanks. Behind the steering wheel, permanently attached to the steering column, are probably the best shift paddles that you will ever find in an electric vehicle. These are metal paddles. They're not plastic. They really have a great feel to them, and these control how the regenerative braking in the system works. You can choose 6 different levels of regen braking from B5, which is the most aggressive, and we can toggle down through B4, 3, 2, 1, and then all the way to B0, which is no regen braking. There's an identical shift paddle on the left side, which toggles you back down. You can see the B indication right there, and that multifunction display is changing as I toggle around with these shift paddles. There's one obvious downside to the design of this particular drivetrain. Again, under 40 miles an hour or so, you only get 160 horsepower. And that's why this runs from 0 to 60 in 9 seconds. And the RAV4, which has about the same kind of total power output and roughly the same kind of curb weight, it's about 200 pounds lighter, goes from 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds. That is significantly faster. The Nissan Rogue Hybrid sort of splits the difference at 8.5 seconds overall. Of course, the big difference between this hybrid and those hybrids is that this will operate in its EV mode for a wide range of driving situations. I'm driving on this winding mountain road, I'm going uphill, total elevation climb of about 800 feet over about 4 miles or so, and this can totally do that in the EV mode, and you can't in the RAV4 or the Rogue, because obviously the battery can't supply enough power, and the battery capacity is not large enough either. Now, if I wanted more power out of this hybrid system and I floored it, even though I'm in the EV mode, it would obviously turn on the gasoline engine, and then we would get that additional oomph. An interesting touch with this hybrid system is that since this is a serial hybrid, the engine does not always spin a direct relational speed to the way the wheels are spinning. So sometimes you may be slowing down and the engine may be speeding up, etc. A few people have incorrectly assumed that this uses a continuously variable transmission. As I explained earlier, this really doesn't use a transmission in the traditional sense. In our braking test, this vehicle stopped from 60 miles an hour in 128 feet. That's a little bit longer than the RAV4, which is logical since we are a little bit heavier, but what surprised me is that this is actually about the same length as the Nissan Rogue Hybrid, and the Rogue Hybrid is actually lighter than this vehicle as well. It likely has to do with the tire selection and the overall brake design. Overall lateral grip in the Outlander is comparable to the RAV4 Hybrid or the Rogue Hybrid, but this suspension does not have the same level of polish that we find in the Rogue or the RAV4. It comes across as feeling a little bit heavy, perhaps a little bit crashy, especially on broken pavement like the road that we're driving on right here. You can definitely feel more of the road imperfections coming into the cabin, and the suspension definitely gets a little bit more upset over some of those road imperfections than the Rogue or the RAV4. It's really obvious when you start pushing this in the corners a bit. In our cabin noise test, we scored 73 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which makes us one of the louder options in this group, especially when we're talking about hybrids. And now we must tackle the tricky subject of fuel economy. This vehicle is rated for 25 miles per gallon according to the EPA. Over our week of mixed driving, we have been averaging a little bit above that when not charging at 26 miles per gallon overall. Now that is notably below the average scores that we find in the RAV4 Hybrid or the Rogue Hybrid. Obviously, this is a little bit heavier than the Rogue or the RAV4 Hybrid, but the overall hybrid system design is also part of the reason that fuel economy is a little bit lower. Because this is a serial hybrid only at those lower speeds, and it seems that Mitsubishi has tuned that single fixed gear ratio for the parallel hybrid drive mode towards lower speeds, highway fuel economy is definitely below what we see in the Rogue. If you're traveling out on country roads like we're on right here, going 45 or 50 miles an hour, then we were able to average nearly 30 miles per gallon in steady state travel. If, however, you kick the speed up to 70 miles an hour, like interstate travel or your average freeway in America, then fuel economy dropped right down to around 24 to 25 miles per gallon. Now, on the flip side of that, the EV side of this system seems to be more efficient than the EPA is telling us, because we averaged about 4 miles per kilowatt hour, which is actually better than some dedicated EVs on the market, and that did surprise me a little bit. The other thing that's worth noting is that this system can regenerate power much more effectively into the battery than any of the other hybrids out there. So if you live in particularly hilly terrain, this may get you slightly better fuel economy overall because it's able to recapture energy all the way down the hill. In terms of overall driving dynamics, the Outlander is obviously not going to handle as well as the Tesla that's in front of me on the road, but the Outlander does relatively well for itself. This slots somewhere in the middle of the pack for the compact crossover segment. However, when it comes to hybrid system operation, this really is one of the best hybrid systems that I have driven in recent memory. Toyota really could learn a lot from Mitsubishi about hybrid system smoothness. Transitions from regenerative braking to friction braking are seamless in this vehicle. This is among the best for those transitions. In addition to that, transitions from serial hybrid mode to parallel hybrid mode are also seamless, and that's something that even the current generation Chevy Volt does not have the best handle on. We then, of course, have the traction capabilities of this system. One of the odd things about Toyota's all-wheel drive system, and a lot of you have commented on this that live in the snow belt and have bought one, is that if the front wheels are spinning and you need more power to go to the rear, your natural reaction is to back off on the throttle, or perhaps hold the throttle steady and then hope that power goes to the rear. But that's not going to help you out in a Toyota all-wheel drive system. The reason for that is that the battery in those systems is not that large, and it cannot deliver that much power to the rear axle. Instead, the engine has to generate that power, and the car's electric systems have to move that power to the rear. But because of the overall design of the system, it really doesn't operate in a true serial hybrid mode. So the engine can't disconnect the front wheels, for instance, generate power and send it to the rear axle. The front wheels are going to be spinning in this process. So if you want additional power to go to the rear, you have to dig a little bit deeper on the accelerator pedal, have those front wheels spin a little bit more, and then you'll get power to the rear axle. Doing that obviously sends power to the rear axle, but it also causes kind of a peculiar feel if you're out there on snow or ice. And this system does not get that same feeling at all, because again, it can lock the power delivery to the front axle and rear axle together electronically, so you're getting the same amount of oomph front and rear. So you don't get that front wheel slipping, dig deeper on the accelerator pedal in order to send power to the rear feeling. The added traction is definitely noticeable on slippery surfaces. Right now we have it in twin motor lock. We have the EV mode on, and we're just going to floor it up this hill and you can see what's going on. This is again quite different than what we see in a Toyota RAV4 hybrid, which would do a lot of front wheel spinning, not a lot of rear wheel spinning. And here, there's no spinning at all. Now let's talk about pricing. The base Outlander plug-in hybrid starts at $34,595. That's fairly well equipped, but if you want the model that we've been driving with all of the features, including the adaptive radar cruise control and of course the moonroof, that's $40,295. That pricing is obviously higher than the regular hybrids in this segment, but keep in mind that plug-in hybrids qualify for a federal tax rebate. That's currently $5,836 for the Outlander plug-in. Obviously, you should check with your tax professional to make sure that applies to you before you depend on one in order to be able to afford the Outlander, but that does have a big impact on Outlander affordability in general because it drops it down to almost the same price as the only other two hybrids in this segment. Obviously, the big reason to buy the Outlander is its plug-in hybrid ability, so that's our first key takeaway for it. If you want a plug-in hybrid crossover that's not a Mitsubishi, then the next least expensive model available would be the Volvo XC60 T8, but that is considerably more expensive than the Mitsubishi because it's quite a different vehicle. In addition to the federal rebate, there are some additional state benefits depending on the state that you live in. For instance, in California, you can drive the Outlander plug-in hybrid all by yourself in the carpool lane. That's a pretty big selling point if you live in this particular state. Other states still have tax credits or tax rebates available that could further lower the cost of the Outlander as well. With that in mind, let's dive right into the first comparison, which would be the Toyota RAV4 hybrid. The LE model starts at $27,235. That is a little bit less expensive than the effective $28,795 starting price of the Outlander, but we actually get a little bit less standard equipment in the RAV4. And of course, it's not a plug-in hybrid. Mitsubishi is offering a long standard warranty on the Outlander, and you should also know that Mitsubishi generally seems to be putting larger discounts on the hood than we find on the RAV4. Even though the RAV4 is one of the older entries in this segment, I think the interior is put together with slightly nicer materials and a little bit better precision than we find in the Outlander. Performance is also better in the RAV4 because its drivetrain produces more power at lower speeds than we find in the Mitsubishi, and that's why the 0 to 60 time is quite different between the two models. The RAV4 has a very capable and accommodating cargo area, and interestingly enough, it actually handles better than the Outlander, especially in top-end trims. That's because the RAV4 is a little bit lighter, the suspension is tuned a little bit differently, and the top-end models of the RAV4 hybrid definitely get wider tires. Now on the downside, the RAV4's electric all-wheel drive system is just not as capable as the all-wheel drive system we find in the Mitsubishi. It's not as capable of sending as much power to the rear whenever it needs to, as I explained earlier in the video. That means that if you're driving your vehicle out on really tough terrain, or if you're driving it on icy or slippery roads or gravel, that sort of thing, you're definitely going to feel more sure-footed in the Mitsubishi than in the Toyota. Next up, we have the Nissan Rogue Hybrid, which is a little bit more expensive than the Toyota at $27,590. It also has a very large and accommodating rear cargo area, very large and accommodating rear passenger area as well. The all-wheel drive system in the Rogue Hybrid is very capable because it is a traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system and it has a center clutch lock option. Even though the Rogue Hybrid is notably slower than the RAV4 Hybrid, it's still faster than the Outlander Hybrid because it produces more power again at those lower speeds. The interior in the Rogue is very comfortable. Handling is a little bit better than the Outlander, but it's not a huge difference because the Rogue is tuned towards the softer side of things, but it's just about as capable when the going gets sticky. If you're driving out again on snow or ice, etc., they're both going to feel fairly sure-footed. Now obviously the biggest difference between the RAV4 Hybrid and the Rogue Hybrid and the Outlander Hybrid on the other side is the fact that the Outlander is a plug-in hybrid, not a traditional hybrid. Now what does that mean to you? Well, you can shift some of the energy being consumed from gasoline over to electricity. In theory, that could lower your carbon footprint if that's something that you're interested in doing. Now, for most people in the United States, that won't mean less expensive operation, because the cost of operating, according to the EPA, your RAV4 hybrid or your Outlander hybrid for the average year, based on the average American driving cycle, it's about the same actually, whether you're driving the Outlander for a period of time on electricity and then gasoline after that, or whether you're just driving the RAV4 hybrid or the Rogue hybrid on gasoline. The reason for that, of course, is the electric range in the Outlander is not 50 or 60 or 70 miles, so the average American would be dipping into that gasoline engine for motivation. We also have the fact that it's going to need to use the gasoline engine in order to accelerate over certain speeds. And then there's the relative efficiency of the Outlander plug-in hybrid when it's operating as a hybrid vehicle. It is notably lower than the 32 or 33 miles per gallon average that we see in the Toyota or the Rogue. Now obviously the plug-in nature is the big difference between the Outlander and the others because it will operate as a true EV for over 20 miles as long as you treat it gently, and it will get you into the carpool lane in California all by yourself. And of course, if your daily commute consists of short drives or you have the ability to charge every 25 miles or so, then you might be able to get the operational costs of the Outlander a little bit below the Toyota or the Nissan. That brings us along to our third and only other real competitor, which would be the all-new Kia Niro Plug-in Hybrid. Although the Niro Hybrid really isn't that direct of a competitor. Not only is it smaller, it's a subcompact crossover, but it's also two-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive like we see in the Outlander. Logically, the price tag on the Niro plug-in is lower than the Outlander. Acceleration is also a little bit slower because it produces less power. In addition to not powering all four wheels, the smaller size of the Niro means that we have less cargo area in the back. Now on the flip side, it is considerably more efficient because it gets 105 mpge. That's a pretty significant bump over the electric efficiency of the Outlander. And then it also gets 46 miles per gallon as a hybrid. That's about double the fuel efficiency that we see in the Outlander in real-world driving. That means that the average family would save about $500 a year in actual fuel costs by driving the Niro around instead of the Highlander. But again, it's not really the same thing. It's smaller, it also isn't an all-wheel drive vehicle. The reality, of course, is that the Outlander plug-in hybrid competes in a world of one. At the moment in the United States, it is the only plug-in hybrid compact crossover. So if you're shopping for a compact crossover that won't break the bank and still has a plug, this is pretty much your only option, so you should definitely run out and buy one. If, however, you're just looking to save a little bit of fuel and you're looking for a more traditional hybrid, I would probably get the Rogue Hybrid if you're focused primarily on highway driving, or the RAV4 Hybrid if you're looking for more of a balance between city fuel economy and highway fuel economy. When operating as a traditional hybrid vehicle, either one of those is going to be a little bit more fuel efficient, a little bit less expensive to operate. But of course, again, if you want to operate on electricity, the Outlander really is your only option. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Be sure and let me know what you think about the Outlander plug-in down there in the comments section below, and I'll see you next week.